Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am looking forward to spending the next 90 minutes with you talking about the about why legislative advocacy is important. Dave, if we could move to the next slide. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Valerie Josland, and I am the Director of Government Relations at Ewald Consulting. I am also the new lobbyist with MASE. Some of you might be familiar with me. My background is I also work with the Minnesota Association of School Administrators, along with a number of other education organizations. And I just started working with MASE this summer, and this is one of my first advocacy trainings, but we plan on doing these trainings more regularly. So today we are going to talk about a few things. First of all, why advocacy is important. How do you connect, and what are the different ways you can connect with legislators? Going to give you an overview of the Minnesota legislature and how a bill becomes a law, as well as where you can find legislative information. And then lastly, we are going to have a guest speaker, Representative Heather Edelson from Edina is going to be joining us, and she is going to share her perspectives of why advocacy is important from for her work as a legislator. It will also give you a chance to ask questions of her about different ways to connect and what ways she finds effective. So it would be helpful for me if you wouldn't mind just putting your name or your school district in the chat so I know where you're coming from and what areas of the state are represented. It's just helpful for me. And then if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Both Dave and I will be checking the chat, and I will pause throughout the presentation to stop and answer your questions. And don't worry, I want you to, even if you think, oh, I should know the answer to this and you don't know the answer, absolutely, that's not an issue. The legislative process is complicated and sometimes weird to navigate. So put any question that you have in the chat, and I want to try to break down any kind of barriers and answer any questions that you might have today. So first of all, Dave, if you wouldn't mind splitting or going to the next slide, please. So why advocacy is important. I just want to share a personal story with you about why I think advocacy is important. You know, if you would have told me when I was in high school that I was going to be a lobbyist, I would have said, I don't even know what a lobbyist is. Why would I even care about this? But for me, I learned from a very young age. My mom was a social worker, and I had a sister with disabilities, and my mom became really, as parents do with kids with disabilities, became a huge advocate for the disability community. And my mom taught me at a very young age about it's important to have your voice heard. So even though I think I was meant to land in this world of advocacy, but I think I was just it was ingrained in me from my mom when I was very young. From a legislator's perspective, and why you'll be hearing from me often about why it's important for you to advocate is, first of all, legislators need information. They have a lot of things coming at them, and they certainly have their own expertise and their own understanding, but they can't possibly know everything that's going on in their community or at the legislature on issues before them. So they do rely on their constituents and advocacy organizations and lobbyists to keep them informed. And I would emphasize the importance on constituents. And in this case, I consider constituents to be people who live in their district, but also people who from local units of government, such as school districts who run programs in their district. You may not live in their district, but you provide a service to the constituents in their district. And so they do rely on you to keep them informed. Secondly, you can make a difference on your issues and concerns, whether it's from your professional concerns working in special ed, or if you have personal interests too. Legislators expect to and want to hear from their members of the public. And sometimes it can seem like you're not making a difference, but the more you spend time educating and connecting with legislators, it does result in, either questions being asked throughout the legislative process, or it also helps them make informed decisions when they do vote or make decisions on things at the legislature. Another reason why advocacy is important is it helps link an issue with a face, and it helps you build relationships with your local legislators. I think a goal that should happen with every MASE member is that if a legislator has a question about special ed, they know who in their district they can call and ask a question and get to know information. And the way you do that is by meeting with legislators, introducing yourself, sharing with them some information, helping educate them about what happens in the legislative cycle, what's happening at the legislative session. I've had lots of experiences where in different areas that I've worked in for other clients when, for instance, a legislator knows who to call in their district if there's a school finance question. They know to call their school finance director. And I think that every legislator should know who in their district should they call when there's questions about special education. So linking an issue with a face. Lastly, advocacy is important because if you don't speak up, others will, and you might not like the outcome. And that's very important. I think especially in the special education world, there are a lot of different organizations and individuals that have ideas about what might or might not happen in special ed. And I think all of you working in special ed in school districts have a perspective that you can share. And if legislators don't hear it, they might only hear one side of the story. I'm just going to take a pause here to make sure there's no questions in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for telling me where you're from. I appreciate knowing what areas of the state are represented. Okay, so I think that there's a lot of perceived barriers to participating and connecting in the legislative process. First of all, and this one isn't a perceived barrier, it's a real barrier, but government can be complicated and hard to navigate. But if you take away one thing about this today, I want you to remember, like, you don't need to understand all the nuances and complications of how the government process, it works. You don't need to know the details of how a bill becomes a law, or what legislator is the chair of a committee, or where is this bill going, or how is it going. I mean, it is helpful to know those things, but you don't have to know those things to be able to connect with your legislator and share your experience, talk with them about what's happening in the district, and help educate them on issues. That's the legislator's job. They can explain the process to you. That's also my job to explain the process to you. So you don't need to worry about knowing the nuts and bolts. It can be frustrating, and we don't always get what we want. And I have worked in the legislative world for about 28 years now, and I completely understand that it can be frustrating. I've also been very frustrated with the process, but I have also come to learn that the process does eventually work. You do eventually make a difference. And I'll give an example, a real life example. I had a client that we would go meet with this legislator every year. This legislator was a person of importance and had a decision-making role to play on funding for this particular client. And every year, the executive director and I would go talk to this legislator. This legislator is relating to early childhood, and this legislator would say, I don't believe in early childhood. I think we shouldn't fund it. I think kids should stay home with their parents, and I don't believe that this funding is of value. We kept coming back and talking to the legislator, and every year we built a relationship with this legislator. Every year this legislator heard from programs in their area that provided the service, and every year we kept coming back with just a little bit more information or new data or up-to-date data. And after probably about the 5th or 6th year of meeting with this legislator said to us, I think I need to rethink my view on this issue. You've done a really good job of educating me. And if we would have not come back after the first or second time of this legislator saying, I don't agree, I don't think this program works, etc., we would never have been able to make that influence. So that I just share that story to say that, like, sometimes you do have to keep coming back. And I do believe that if you keep coming back, you do help educate them and you can change people's minds. A lot of people believe that your voice doesn't matter and that you can't make a difference. Another example is a legislator would share with me, you know, Valerie, if I hear from 10 people, that says to me there's about 100 people back home who care about this issue and probably share the same viewpoint. And while you may not see the immediate results of that relationship that you've built or that communication, the legislators do take into consideration what are they hearing from people back home. It's also important for them to hear all sides of the issue, and I will talk about that in a little bit. Secondly, now you are very busy. You have demands in your professional life and you have demands in your personal life. And complicated with that, with a system that might seem hard to navigate, I get why people might not want to reach out to their legislators, but it doesn't take as much work as I think people think it might. It takes some intentional connections throughout the year. It could be as little as once a year. I would not recommend once a year. I would recommend about 3 or 4 times a year. And it can simply be communication by email, inviting them to come see your program, sending them some information by email during the legislative session on issues that are important to your area, and then a follow-up after session. And I'll talk more about how to do that, but it's not, you have to come to the Capitol every day, you have to follow every committee hearing, you have to keep track of every comings and goings of the legislator. It's just some significant key touch points that you can make throughout the year. And those touch points really do make a difference. Lastly, I do often hear, well, we have a lobbyist, Valerie, we have you, that's what you're for. And I am a very good lobbyist. I work very hard to represent your interests with legislators. But the legislators see me, and I work very hard to have great relationships with legislators in both bodies and on both sides of the aisle. But legislators see me all the time. And while that is helpful, I serve as a touch point and I help connect legislators and I serve as the eyes and ears for you on what's happening at the Capitol. I have one thing that I can't share with every legislator. I get to vote for my own legislators, but I don't get to vote for all 201. Whereas with all of you, I'm sure there's enough MASE members that can vote for all 201 legislators numerous times over and over again. So legislators aren't accountable to me. They are accountable to their constituents and their entities and organizations that work with their constituents back home. And you have a lot of power because of that ability to vote, but also you have a lot of power because you have a lot of knowledge about what's happening in their district, and you can help them connect the dots between what's happening at the legislature and what's happening back home. And lobbyists are an important part of the legislative process. They're one leg of the stool of the legislative process. I consider advocacy another leg of that stool, because of the power and influence that you have personally. Please. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of the lobbyist to help you understand the work that I will be doing for MASE moving forward. So lobbyists, we help associations, corporations, nonprofit organizations, or local units of government to get their voice heard and hopefully influence policymakers. Lobbyists work to ensure that government officials hear and understand both sides of an issue. So I don't ever want a legislator to hear, I haven't heard from anyone on this. So I either make sure I have some kind of personal conversation with the legislator, but more often, and really prioritize, I want to make sure legislators hear from people back in their district. I apologize. Dave, could you let me know? I just got a note my internet is unstable. Can you all?
It's a little choppy. It did get started. It started to get a little choppy, yeah. The audio.
Okay, let me fix that. I apologize.
Cut out there for me. Oh.
Okay, how's that?
Sounds good so far.
Okay, I apologize for that. so I was saying, I really want legislators to hear and understand both sides of the issue, and lobbyists help do that, but they also help make sure that the organizations we represent communicate with their members to make sure they're sharing both sides of one side of the issue to the legislators. Lobbyists, we bring people together to share information and ideas. I bring MASE members to the Capitol to talk with legislators. I bring the chairs of the legislative committee, the tri-chairs of the legislative committee to talk with legislators and staff. And I am kind of the touch point. Like, people know, like, if I need to know about special ed, Valerie's the lobbyist for MASE. We're going to connect with her. She knows who can help answer these questions. And I try not to be the one to answer the questions. I always try to bring in folks from the organizations I work with to talk with legislators, especially if it's a complicated issue or controversial, or it might bring and needs a more thoughtful policy discussion. I'm the linchpin and I bring those people together, but I really rely on all of you to be the content experts. Another role that lobbyists play is we help our clients understand the legislative process, how it works, and why decisions are made. I think it's important to understand the legislative process and how it works, because it helps you know when is the right time to connect, etc. And I also help you understand, what is politically reasonable, what is politically possible, what are all the different factors that go into the decisions at the Capitol, whether it might be, what does the budget outlook look like, what is the timing, what is the process, what are the different reasons legislators make the decisions that they make? Are there political reasons? And sometimes a lot of decisions are political at the legislature, but sometimes decisions are made because either they have a lot of money, or they don't have enough money, or there's geographic reasons why people have made decisions. Like, why did the bonding bill pass? Well, they didn't get enough votes from the minority, or why is this particular issue highlighted this year? Well, there might be more legislators representing a certain area that had a lot of influence, so that's why those decisions were made. I work to understand and explain the context of why they do what they do. And sometimes we don't always have the answers of why they do what they do, but most often than not, lobbyists are usually able to kind of put the pieces of that puzzle together. Lobbyists help our clients understand when and how to engage in the process. I wouldn't ask you in the summer to connect with legislators about a specific bill, because they're not making decisions right at that time. I work to make sure what is the best time for my clients to connect and talk with legislators about issues. Or how often is it important to connect with legislators on certain issues. And then lastly, lobbyists serve as eyes and ears for their clients. You are busy working in school districts, working with families, preparing IEPs, working with students. You do not have the time to sit and watch the hours and hours of committee hearings or floor sessions that happen at the Capitol. And that's my job. I go, when the legislature's in session, I am at the Capitol every single day. There's a committee hearing or floor session. And I pay attention to what is coming, what's happening. Are there issues that came up that might not be on our radar screen, or I kind of am I bird dog what's happening at the legislature, and you will, during the legislative session, you will see weekly updates from me outlining kind of everything that's happening. And then I forgot to put this bullet, but lastly, lobbyists, we help our clients take their legislative priorities and put them through the legislative process. We get the bills drafted, we make sure hearings are held on the issues. We work to make sure our clients know when is testimony, the opportunity to provide testimony available, what testimony is useful, what to expect with the legislative process. Next slide, please. I am just going to pause here. I'm kind of going through a lot of different information. And so I just want to pause and see if there are any questions. Okay, great. Well, the question in the chat is, will this PowerPoint be available at the end of the training? Yes, it will be available. And I can't remember, maybe Aaron can chime in. I don't know if this is going to be put on the website or not. I think Dave is giving a thumbs up as well. And Aaron is as well too. Great. Okay, so there, how do you go about connecting with your legislator? How do you even reach out to them? What's the best way to ask them to either meet with you or come for a meeting? There are a number of different ways to reach out to your elected officials to begin a conversation or request a meeting. Some are more effective than others. The most effective way is email. Most legislators read their own email. If not, their legislative assistants read their own email. And so that is and I will show you later where to find that information. So email is really the best way to connect. Calling their Capitol office is usually not the best way to connect. I think it goes into a voicemail that, to be quite honest, I don't think it's checked very often. So I would not do that. Now, if you build a relationship with your legislator and they come out to visit and they say, please reach out to me if you ever have any questions, it is completely appropriate to ask them for what is the best way to connect with you. Can I have your cell phone? And most legislators will give out their cell phone nowadays. Very few don't. I've never experienced that as being a problem, but I usually wait for that until I have built the relationship. And many of them might even offer. And if they don't want you to have their cell phone, they'll say, oh, just email me. I'm really good about checking my email. But and sometimes, and I'll show you on the legislative website where to get their contact information. Some legislators do include their home information on the legislative website and maybe a home phone number. I wouldn't communicate that way. I would communicate by email first. I would really wait to use any other information until they've said, yep, you can here's my cell phone number. Mail, I would not relay information by mail or ask for a meeting by mail, but I do think mail is a very useful tool for one thing, and not one thing only, but I think personal thank you cards get noticed when those are mailed to their Capitol office. I would say especially if if you have their home address, you send them a personal thank you card to their home address. I think I send a lot of personal thank you cards after I've had some in-person meetings, or if they've come out for tours, or if they've carried bills for me and I send a thank you note. It does get noticed, and it goes a long way in building a positive relationship with the legislator. You can also connect by social media. You can, relay information that way, but I think social media is a really good way to get information about the legislators. Most of them have Twitter feeds or Facebook pages, and I think that's a really good way to learn about the legislators. But some people have communicated information via social media, and I will show you on the legislative website where to get some of that information. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are the different ways you can connect? So when you email the legislator, what are you going to ask them to do? One, you can invite them for a personal visit in their district to come see your program, you could invite them to meet with them for coffee at a local coffee shop in the community. If you want to just talk or relay information, you can invite them to come to your office and meet with you and or staff if you want to talk about specific issues. I think legislators are very comfortable doing that. Those kind of personal visits are better to happen over the interim, which is summer and fall, as that they don't have a lot of time for those kinds of meetings during the legislative session, which happens in the winter. But legislators are often happy to give another half hour, an hour to meet with them personally throughout the interim. You can come visit them at their Capitol office during legislative session, Some legislators do have office hours during the interim, but more often than not, they'd rather meet back home in their district. And so visits during the Capitol office are usually during session. So for instance, when MASE is going to have a lobby day next session, you could come and visit them at their Capitol office for their lobby day. Those kinds of meetings are typically only 15 minutes, especially if it's during the legislative session, because they're busy. You know, they only have certain chunks of time for meetings when they're not either on the floor or in floor session or in committee hearings. So those are usually only 15 minutes. A really great way to connect during the interim is have them tour a program or tour a building or tour your district, whichever is appropriate. Legislators really like that. It's a great tool to help them learn and help them, see firsthand what's actually happening in especially in your programs. I think special ed might be a little hard for some people to understand. They don't necessarily know what it might be. What it might look like. Legislators might have an idea of, kind of a typical elementary school or a typical high school. They may not know exactly what special ed might look like in a school. Some districts have what's I've referred to as legislative events. So they might have a legislative breakfast where they invite the delegation to come and hear from the superintendent in the different program areas. It gives them a good way to learn about what's happening in the district. I attended one that Scred put on Tuesday night, and I thought it was a really great opportunity for legislators to learn about what's happening in all of the Scred member districts. I think those are also more appropriate during the legislative interim. They will do them during session if it's early enough in session and at the right time. But I think those are really great. You can also just contact your legislators by email or phone about a specific issue. MASE has invested in some advocacy software, so you will see some communications coming from MASE, encourage them when session starts, encouraging you to reach out to your legislators to share the MASE legislative platform. You will also likely see communications coming from MASE at certain times of the legislative session for you to contact your legislators about specific issues. But if there's other things that you want them to know about, like some information about what's happening with your special ed programs in your district, you can just email them and say, hey, I wanted to flag this for you, thought you might be interested in learning this information. And I think that's especially relevant if you have members of the legislature who serve on the education committees. And I did mention phone, but I would reserve phone for if you have that relationship and you were able to get their cell phone information. Another great way to connect is to involve yourself in your professional organization that advocates on issues you care about. They will encourage and help you find ways to engage in the process, such as the MASE Legislative Day. And I saw that Aaron put the date of February 27th in the chat, so you can note that now. I mentioned already about following them on social media. I think especially if you follow members on Twitter, I think generally for their official legislative pages on Twitter, they tend to share information about what they're doing as legislators. They tend to not be focused on the politics of being in office. They tend to focus on their kind of constituent work and legislative work. I think but it's also a good way to connect. You can, like their posts or provide feedback or etc. that way. Next slide, please. Okay, so you've reached out to your legislator, you've sent them an email, they've said, yep, absolutely, we'd love to come meet with you, or we'd love to come visit, or I'd love to have you come meet me at my Capitol office to talk about issues. What do you do to prepare for the meeting? I think it's always good to have some information. You don't need to have all this information, but I think it's helpful to have this information. I think it's, first of all, what is their political affiliation? Are they a Democrat or are they a Republican? And when you talk with your legislators, the topic of politics should not come up. Most legislators don't, they keep a line between what might be happening in elections and what might not be what is happening legislatively. You might get some of it, but the most don't. But it is good to know their political affiliation, because it's helpful to understand the context of how they might frame arguments or might be thinking about things. I also think it's helpful to know their political affiliation, to know that are they in the majority or are they in the minority? You know, the majority in the legislature has the ability to advance bills and pass laws, and the minority doesn't typically, although they do. It's not, you know, just because they're in the minority does not mean they don't get to pass bills, but it's much harder. But it is helpful context to know that. Another item that's helpful to understand is what is their background, their biography. And I'll show you on the legislative page where you can find some information, but also Google is a really good way to get this information. You just Google your representative's name. You'll often find their campaign page. You might also find some other things, like if they were on the school board. But their campaign pages also they always have an About Me tab, and it will share with you, you know, did they serve on the city council, or were they teachers, or it'll also share with you the issues that they care about and the things that they campaigned on. The next item that is, I think this is really good information to know, is what committees do they serve on? And more importantly, for your purposes, do they serve on the education committees? That is good information. If they don't serve on the education committees, legislators still want to learn and want to know. But if they serve on an education committee, they're in a position to need to know more information and want to know more information, but also they are in a decision, especially if they're in the majority, they're in a decision-making capability if they serve on the education committees on issues that we care about. The last one, I think this is helpful to know, but you don't need to know if they have chief authored, what education bills they have chief authored. And certainly if there's a bill that MASE is advocating for, we share that information throughout session. And again, when I show you the legislative webpage, I'll show you where to find that information. And again, I wouldn't be too worried about that one, but it is just like helpful. I use this example. You know, if there's a legislator that has authored a bill to align state and federal special ed laws, that's probably useful information for you to know. And again, it's okay if you don't, but I think it helps me to feel more comfortable going into meetings when I know this information. And then just before you are meeting, think about, you know, how are you going to frame your discussion and what information do you want to relay? Next slide, please, Dave. Okay, so you've scheduled the meeting, you've done the background research, or you're getting ready to write your email to your legislator. What are some things you want to remember? First of all, you know, always introduce yourself and this is important too if you send an email. Let them know what your connection is to their district. You know, are you a constituent, or do you work in a school district that's in their legislative district? They want to know that. They want to know who you are, how you are connected, and briefly, what issue are you contacting them about? And then once you've done that, provide them some general background information to help them educate them on the issue. But this is really important. Keep it simple. You know, they don't want email that's 8 paragraphs long. They get a lot of information, and so you want them to be able to read it quickly so they see this is who you are, why you're reaching, what's their connection to you, and what that you want them to know. And in the education world, this is really important. And I sometimes I'm guilty of this myself, but stay away from jargon and acronyms and technical details, because it gets really distracting for them. And then they're not really even hearing your message. So in the education world, we have a lot of acronyms. In special ed, there's a lot of acronyms. Legislators most likely don't know what FAPE is. They don't know what DAPE is. They most likely would know what IEP is, but I wouldn't even assume that they know what IEP is. So always, when you're talking about them, say, you know, an IEP is an individualized education plan. It's something that districts are required to work on with the parents to make sure services are being provided. Just don't assume, and even if they sit on the education committees, don't assume they know this information. And I've been guilty of this myself. And when I've like started talking and use an acronym or jargon, I see the legislator like they fall behind and they're like trying to catch up and figure out what was I just trying to tell them, and then they're not really hearing the message that I'm talking about. So when you start right away without those acronyms, you're able to get your message across. Next thing is, you know, localize the issue. Tell them why they should care about it. Show them why it's important to the community, the families you serve, the teachers that work in your district, why it's important to your district, etc. And just let them know. Don't make them guess. Tell them what they need to know. Legislators get so much information, and it's just easier to get right to the point. And always ask them for a specific action to be taken. If you're emailing them to share information, just say an action, even if it's not about a specific bill, but you just want them to know about something that's happening in your district. The action that you want them to take is, if you ever have any follow-up questions or want to learn more, please email me. If you are writing them about a bill that either you support or oppose, tell them why you support or oppose it, and then ask them to support or oppose it. If you are emailing them about a visit, be very clear. I'd like you to come see this program. I'd like you to spend an hour visiting and seeing this program in place. And always ask for them to do something, even if it's just, I want to be a resource, let me know if you have questions. When you're meeting in person with a legislator, it's okay if you don't know if they ask you a question and you don't know the answer to it. That's completely fine. I don't know the answer to a lot of questions legislators get me, and I often say I don't know, but I do follow up with them and get them information later. And then always, if you don't know the answer to the question, don't try to you know, muddle your way through it. Don't give them wrong information, give them accurate information. And if you don't know the answer, just right away say, I'll follow up with you later. And then I mentioned this earlier, but follow up with a thank you note. If they've taken the time to come meet with you in the district and tour the district, always send a handwritten thank you note. And then if you've met with them in their office and you've had a couple exchanges, I think an email is fine, but remind them like, hey, I appreciated the time you took to learn about House File 32, which aligns, you know, it is a bill related to special ed. You could explain what the bill is. Yeah, I'm just checking to make sure we have a guest speaker coming in soon. I don't see her, so I just wanted to take a pause to make sure she's not. Okay, great. Okay, next slide, please, Dave. I think if folks don't mind, if maybe we could just take a pause here. I know Representative Edelson is going to be coming in soon. Okay, we are going to start up again. Dave, do you mind stop sharing the screen for a minute while we speak with Representative Edelson? Great. Well, we have Representative Heather Edelson here today. I just want to say a few things about her, and then I'll let her introduce herself and talk about her background. But I have worked pretty closely with Representative Edelson on a number of issues over the last several years. She is a legislator from the Edina area. Some of you might be familiar with her because of her work on the READ Act, but she has worked on a number of other issues as well, and I'll let her talk about those. But in my tenure in working at the legislature, I have found Representative Edelson to be very open, hardworking, and she works very hard to try to bring all the different stakeholders together to try to find consensus and work on issues. We haven't always agreed and we haven't always found consensus, but I really appreciate that Representative Edelson always tries to do that, which I think is an important part of the legislative process. She has also always had a really open door and has been very easy to talk to. And I want to just take a chance here right now to thank her for that time. And so, Representative Edelson, thank you for taking the time to come speak with us. I hope that you can share a little bit about your background. And then also, we would just really love to hear your thoughts on why it's important for organizations and individuals to advocate with their legislators and come to the Capitol and visit with you, send emails about issues they care about. And if you could just share with us the different ways you find as a legislator has been effective for you to hear from your constituents.
That's a lot. I think, I don't know about you guys, but I have a consensus that the cat behind Valerie just a few moments ago was absolutely adorable. So, okay, well, good. Well, my dog is over there sleeping, the beauty of working from home. So MASE, so just so I know who's on the call, do we have a lot of special educators or directors of special education on the call?
Correct.
Well, you will be happy to know. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
They're from across the state.
Across the state. Good. Well, thank you for your work. You're amazing. My sons go to Southview Middle School in Edina, and we're known for our unified program, which I was super excited about. We've won all these awards. And anyways, my son has an IEP, and we just did his IEP meeting, and he's going to high school, and it's like, very exciting stuff. It's like graduating from some programs. So feeling really good about that. But happy to be here today. I would, legislators, what I think when people come to the Capitol, you're coming to this intimidating building. And trust me, when I was first elected, I was like, whoa. First of all, I needed it to be like, when you go to a new job or like a new school, like back at university, you'd be like, can you hear me? Wait, hold on. What is it? If you could turn on your cameras. Oh, good. Sorry, I was just reading the comments. Yes, turn on your cameras. I would love to see your beautiful faces. Okay, but when you're like, when you started university many, many years ago, for you guys, probably but for me, like an absurd amount of time ago, right? So, but you had to like walk your schedule. So the Capitol is the same way. You're like, I'm so intimidated. There's this big building. I remember the first time I had a tobacco 21 was my bill, where you moved the smoking age to 21. We would have reduced people smoking, younger people. So it was great. But I remember going to the Ways and Means, and it was like not a very expensive bill, but very intimidating, right? It can feel like that when you're talking to legislators, but we're just people. We're just people. A lot of us, like I'm a clinical social worker is my background. I was super involved with my community. I was on boards and commissions, and my husband's like, you couldn't stop me from volunteering. I'd be like showing up places, like thinking I was running it. And he was like, so, we got to figure out how you channel this. Right. So, but legislators really want to hear from you. I thank you, Valerie, for all those nice comments, because I really do. My meetings tend to be when I have a piece of legislation. The READ Act kind of looked like this screen, right? Valerie, we would have like stakeholders from every single group, and it'd be like, where's Waldo? Speaking of that, I'm wearing red today. I kind of look like the girl version of Waldo. Does anybody remember the girl's name? Come on, you guys. Friday. Look at everybody is like not into this. But yeah. So anyways, I think just making sure you're having good conversations with the legislators. We want to hear from you. You're the experts. We do not know about every issue. Some legislators might pretend they do, but they do not. But you guys do. If it's around special education or whatever areas that you're working on, we want to hear from you. It's okay if we don't agree. I always tell my sons this too, is we have to learn how to disagree in a way that is thoughtful and that is kind and that really tries to help us move issues forward for the state of Minnesota. So I would just say, we're people, and it's really important that you advocate here at the Capitol. It's confusing, but it's important. Yay, Julie's got her camera on.
Yeah. Heather, I'll open it up, and I want folks on the here to feel free to either unmic and ask your questions or vote questions in the chat, but I'll just start it off with a question. Heather, I should call you Representative Edelson, but I know you so well, I'm going to call you Heather.
You call me Heather.
Can you share about kind of what do you like to hear when people come and talk with you about issues? What what's the best way to communicate or deliver a message?
Stories. You guys, stories are so important for making change. What I've learned, this is my 5th year at the Capitol, and what you're imagining now is 5 years in politics. How does she do it? Yeah, I know. I feel like that it's my last term at the legislature. I have one more session left, so Valerie only has to do with me one more session. But what is the most effective is when people come and sit down and they tell you a story. I always love to tell stories about with the READ Act. What we did with the READ Act, it was really trying to take blame and shame out of what was happening and really bring this togetherness approach to it. And it was stories. It was the story. It was my own story, right? I grew up as a person that struggled with dyslexia. And we didn't know what it was. I'm 42. We didn't know what it was then. People were like, well, she seems like a smart kid, but she's not reading. And I even look at my own son today. You guys are all just getting your MCA scores back, which I hate MCA scores. I hate MCAs in general. But my son, who we only have him take the math MCA because they both struggle with reading, he had the little, you guys, you know what I'm talking about, right? The little paper, they got him yesterday, right? It's here, we're December, we're getting it back from last year. Great, super helpful. So he opens it. He's really nervous to open this piece of paper. He opens it and he says, Mom, and he closes it. He says, Mom, what does it say about me if I didn't do well? And his face and the feeling and the feeling in that car was really heavy. And so we got home, we parked the car and he says, all right, he opens it and he was below, right? He needs improvement. And it has that like gauge, right? And my son had tears in his eyes. And I was like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to rip up that piece of paper right now because that piece of paper says nothing about who you are. And now, if I was to go and have a piece of legislation, which I have in the past, to try to, get rid of or move the MCA to a different, like a map tester, right? I would be telling a story like that because that makes you feel for my son, Sam, who's this incredible human who's just trying to survive in the world. That test could define him or it could not define him, right? So I think stories about, when you think about Alex Smith, how he was rationing his insulin and we were able to pass legislation that wasn't okay. Stories are what drive policy. So share stories.
So I'm going to hand it off to folks on the Zoom. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask Representative Edelson? I have more in the queue, so I can ask more, but.
We can do Minnesota trivia. It's Friday. I like it. We can do legislative trivia.
So here's a question, Heather. I think often the public feels like their voice doesn't matter. So can you share with us, what do you do with the information when people reach out to you, whether it's in a meeting or you get an email? Like, how does that guide your decision making, and what do you hear from your other colleagues about what they're hearing from their constituents, and how does that ultimately impact the decisions when you vote?
Yeah, so what we do is so I have a tracker at my office when people contact me on issues, specifically issues that I care about. So, each legislator represents a point of view, right? Just like each person on this call. I don't know how many squares there are. I always like to do try to sum it up. But how many people are on this call?
28.
28. So there's 28 different points of view on this call, right? So at the legislature, there's 134 people in the House of Representatives, 134 points of view. Now, of course, each one of us brings with us, how we grew up as a child, issues we care about, the things we talked about on our elections. So those are going to be things that we focus on. And of course, you're going to see like a lot of what we see at the Capitol is, yes, we get emails of support. We get much more emails of opposition, right? So you come in and say, I have real concerns about this bill. Now, do people, I hear it every different advocacy. Does it actually matter if, the legislator represents this point of view, and the point of view is opposite from my point of view? Is there any way to change that person's point of view? What do you think? Like, do you think that's a real issue that we struggle with? Of course it is. And I would say I'm not going to say that you can change everybody's mind. You're not going to. But there's always a legislator. Like Valerie knows this. I really do my best. I do my best because I do know about how hard it is if you kind of get embedded in your issue. So I really do try to say, well, if this isn't the solution, what is the solution? Like Valerie knows this. We're working on something right now where there was a horrendous case. And because it's Friday, I don't want to talk about it. This or that. We'll keep it nice and fluffy here. So, but if it's not a solution, and I would say this to you too, and I people know this is if you don't come to me and just oppose something, come to me with a different idea then. And so that's the other thing I would say to you is if you're like going to a legislator that maybe is a different party than you are, maybe you're a Republican and that person's a Democrat or vice versa, go and say, hey, listen, I know your point of view, or you think this is a good idea, but can I just tell you from my perspective, and here's a story, and could we possibly look at doing it slightly different? You'd be surprised. I have seen a lot of people change, like even Zach Duckworth did a great job at that, like literally on the House floor. He was like, no, he stood in opposition to something, but then he went and changed it. So Republicans and Democrats at the Capitol, I know we love to villainize the other party. There's a lot of us that are actually just really good people doing public service. And you don't only think about, what does it actually even mean to be a Democrat or be a Republican? There's not. I mean, many of us know it doesn't necessarily fit into this nice little compact box. And also, Ava, thank you for sharing. Sharing your story too, because I think a lot of people, MCA scores, man, Valerie, let's get rid of them. MCAs are irritating.
Yeah. Well, now you can, because the federal government is talking about more flexibility. So.
Oh, I missed this. We must talk more, because they just really what those scores do to kids and families that don't even know you can opt out, because we're an opt-out state. It's not good. It's not good.
I'll connect you offline. Yeah. So the next question I have for you, and I hope certainly I want to remind MASE members, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We talked before you got online about kind of different ways to connect, that you can email legislators about information, to share information, whether it's about what might be happening in their districts or about a bill. They can ask to meet with the legislator at their Capitol for lobby days, and then activities during the interim. And I shared with them that legislators, and I hope you will affirm this, that legislators are like when they get invited to come tour a program or see something that's happening in the district. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that, and hopefully reaffirm what I shared with the group?
Ooh, what if I totally disagreed with her? That would be funny. No, I agree. We do. I mean, as long as it's not like multiple, sometimes you're like, well, okay, I've been to like 5 places. I'm good. But yeah, no, I mean, I was able to see the READ Act in, we've been early starters here in Edina, really able to see some of the, how it's being taught in a classroom for first graders. I'm going to a school in Minneapolis next week. Yeah, we love to go on tours. I've been on tours of food shelves. It's great. And so also just so it's good to have them there, because then if you really want to pass a piece of legislation, like you're like thinking about, I don't even know. I'm tired. It's Friday. It's been a really busy week, but you want something, you want something to pass the next session, or you're understaffed and you don't have enough subs. Come and show what teachers are having to do. Or if we wanted to get rid of the MCAs, we could say, oh, look at what happens around staff time with having to staff these MCAs, right? And then we show what it looks like and how kids aren't learning, and what it looks like for kids. Are they stressed out? What's happening? All those things. And so we want to show the legislators, because then ultimately they're going to have a story to tell in front of the committee. And so I think, yeah, the visits are super good. I mean, it's experience, right? And experience impacts policy, stories impact policy. So yeah, I think it's true.
Well, I want to be cognizant of your time. Certainly appreciate you visiting with us for a few minutes today. And unless others have questions, I want to let you go, and I'll certainly be following up with you on a few things.
Yeah, I want to hear more about the federal policy. Exciting, because I, feel like I emailed the U.S. Secretary of Education like a year ago. Still waiting for my response, by the way. Okay, good to see you all. Happy Friday. Thank you for all of your work. I hope you all give yourself like a giant pat on the back. Pat for, oh, come on, just do it. Just do it. Just pat yourself. You're amazing humans that make the world better. Thank you so much for all of your work. Bye, you guys.
She's a ball of energy. Sorry, shifting gears. Dave, if you don't mind sharing your screen again. Okay, wonderful. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so you have your meeting, you've reached out to them, you've communicated with them by email, you're getting ready to go meet with them. How do you want to frame your elevator pitch or your story? These are just some things to help you think about. It's not meant to be, you know, the only items that you might think about, but I put this slide together just as a way to help you have some, you know, openers to think about putting together your speech. And I think what you share with legislators is probably not any different than what you might share with maybe your advisory council, your school board. When you meet with your superintendent, you know, you probably share very similar information. So what do you want to do? What's your goal of the meeting? Are you going to raise awareness on an issue or concern? Are you going to share information about what's happening in your district, or you want to help educate them on a program? You want to request a meeting or get to know them, or you want to ask them to support or oppose a specific bill? Remember, when you are thinking about your framing, your discussion, you know, tell your story, not someone else's. If you do tell someone else's story, just say, you know, this is anecdotal, or this is what others have shared with me. Always tell your story in a positive way. I think Representative Edelson, she always challenges me to come back with a solution and not just oppose. So what are the, and I try to take that into consideration too, like how can I approach this in a positive way and not in a negative way? Again, stay message and be on brief. Legislators don't have a lot of time, and even if they are coming to see your, like, tour a program, the time that you spend meeting with them is probably about 15 minutes, because you want to give them time to really see the program, and they can ask questions as you're doing the tour. But if you're meeting with them at the Capitol, you probably only have 15 minutes, so that's not a lot of time. And you know, I'm a born and raised Minnesotan, and I love the Minnesotan hello and the Minnesotan goodbye. You got to cut both those short. And then always, you know, this, be state as the facts that you have and be 100% truthful. I was at an event last night with a legislator, and the legislator, somehow we got into a topic about communicating with them, and the legislator said, if anyone has told me a mistruth, they will never be allowed in my office again. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, even though you might have communicated this in your email when you're meeting with them, again, tell them who you are, where you live or work. Now, I recognize for a lot of people in school districts, you might live in a different district than where you work. So if you're meeting with your own legislator from your own district where you live, just let them know you're a constituent. But if you are meeting with a legislator that represents your school district, just make sure they know that you are from a district in their legislative district. What's the connection? Tell them about your program or profession, what's working, what's not working. Describe why the issue is important to you. Describe what impact the issue has on you or the individuals you serve, and let the legislator know what they can do to support your priorities. Now, Representative Edelson said, you know, she loves stories, and a lot of legislators love stories. I think it's also helpful to have some factual or data-driven information too, to kind of back up the story or show, you know, explain the story or add to that narrative. Next slide, please. Some things to remember, and I think Representative Edelson reinforced this and probably showed this. You know, elected officials expect and want to hear from their constituents. This is how they stay in touch. It's how they learn and how they work to be advocates as best they can for their district. Be patient. Change takes time. You might not succeed the first or even second attempt. And I would, you know, we talked about this earlier, but I never want a legislator to say, I've never I haven't heard from anyone on this issue. And that's important because if they may not care about the issue at all, and if they haven't heard from anyone, they really wouldn't care about an issue. But if they've heard from people, they might change their mind, or they might be more inclined to vote the way that we want if they've heard from someone. Like often if they haven't heard about the issue at all, they might be inclined to just support it because the legislator carrying the bill is their friend, or they don't have to worry about it because no, they haven't heard about it. And I'll give a really good example of why it's important for legislators to hear from constituents. Very long time ago, this was back in 2006, but I've heard this in other tables with other people as well. The governor had a proposal to change the way a certain program was funded, and it caused an uproar for one of the organizations that I worked with. And an uproar is an understatement. And that organization did all kinds of grassroots advocacy, and they had parents and teachers and directors reaching out to their legislators. There were 2 legislators on this committee that killed the governor's proposal for moving forward. And their words, one legislator's words were exactly, I have heard from X in my district, and over my dead body am I going to let this proposal pass. So that's just, we see examples of the outcome that advocacy can have like that every single day. Representative Edelson talked about this. Legislators are ordinary citizens. They really are every day, just like you and I. They just happen to want to serve their community by running for public office. Most legislators are not running for the state legislature because they have higher political aspirations. Sure, there's some that want to be governor or run for Congress, or Secretary of State or what have you, but most of them are there because they want to serve their community. And they are also really everyday people like us. They have the same worries, the same challenges, the same joys that we all do. They have kids who get married. Many have kids in childcare. Many have kids who are in special ed. Some, they also many have jobs outside of their legislative service. And they work very hard to get elected, and they want to do their best to represent their communities. And what I was going to say, I apologize. I think, and the other thing to think about too is it doesn't matter what political party they're from. We don't only talk to legislators who are in the majority. We talk to all legislators, whether they're in the majority or in the minority. They have all earned their election certificate, and they have all earned a right to be there, and they worked very hard to be there. But it's also important to understand our majorities change quite often in Minnesota. We have a DFL trifecta now. That could change with the election next year. The House could flip, and the Republicans who are in the minority now could be in the majority. And we don't want them to have felt ignored. We have to have relationships with everyone, regardless of what role they play, because they've earned the right to serve. They've won their election, but also they could be in a point to make decisions on issues that we care about. And then lastly, I think it's important to make efforts to connect throughout the year. You become a reliable source of information for them. They're more likely to respond when we're also not reaching out to them only when we need something. They do like it when they hear from people other times of the year, just sharing information or just even touching base, especially if you've built a relationship with the legislature, with a certain legislator. It's okay to just say, hey, I'm just touching base to see if you had any questions. I don't want you to forget, I'm happy to be a resource for you. That is perfectly fine. They understand sometimes relationships are transactional, but when they don't only have to be transactional, they appreciate that. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm not going to go in too much into the nuts and bolts of how a bill becomes a law, but I do wanted to just give some good context for you. Right now, the Minnesota legislature is comprised, there's 134 state representatives. And right now the split in the House is 70 Democrats, well, it's 69 Democrats and 64 Republicans. There is a special election in Eagan on Tuesday to replace an open seat. There is an independent candidate, a Republican candidate, and a Democratic candidate. So that makeup could change, but I think the seat will still be in Democrat hands after Tuesday. In the Senate, there are 34 Democrats and 33 Republicans. Just an interesting note, maybe because I'm a nerd, this last election brought a big change. You know, we have a DFL trifecta, but there was a large percentage of turnover here this last election. In the last election, there was 35% of the House members did not serve last year, and 36% of the Senate members did not serve. And that is the biggest flip I have experienced in my many years of working at the legislature. Our legislature is becoming very increasingly diverse. There's a larger number of Black, Indigenous, people of color serving in the legislature. We also have more religious diversity. There's Muslim legislators, there's more Jewish legislators. There's also more women serving in office than we have in the past. And then, so how did the legislature arrive at 134 House seats and 67 Senate seats? That is determined by the US Census every 10 years. Each House district represents around 35,000 residents, and each Senate district represents around 70,000 residents. And that's important to remember. They represent everyone. They don't only represent those that might be from their same political party or those that voted for them. They represent everyone who resides in their district. State representatives serve 2-year terms and state senators serve 4-year terms. There's a little caveat every 10 years when we have redistricting, the senators are in the middle. They only serve 2 years and then they have to run again. Legislators don't get paid a lot. The legislature is considered a part-time legislature, and that only means that we have a legislative session that is part-time. Legislators work throughout the year, though. Their salary is set by an independent commission, and right now the salary is set at $48,250 per year. They can also collect per diem for living and travel expenses. Legislators who live 50 miles or more away do get living expenses. If you live within the metro, within 50 miles, you do not get living expenses. But legislators can collect a daily per diem. They don't have to collect the per diem, although many do. So once the election is over, the legislature goes through a process of every election cycle determining their committee, who's going to be their leaders, who's going to be the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader in the Senate, what committees are going to be in place. And so how that works is the whoever's in the majority, the caucus in the majority chooses who's going to be the leader of the House and the leader of the Senate. And right after the election, this last election, I'll use that as an example, the Democrats met shortly after the election and they elected who was going to be their Speaker of the House. And similarly, that happens in the Senate. And it's the Majority Leader in the Senate and the Speaker in the House determine what committees are going to be in place. The committees are often structured by the functional budget areas. So there's a tax committee, an education finance committee, education policy committee, health and human services, transportation. Sometimes there's some other committees that are directed at some other areas, but for the most part, they all follow the functions of state government. And the committee chairs are appointed by the Speaker, and the individuals that want to be committee chairs, they lobby, they work, they do whatever they can to get appointed by the Speaker and the Majority Leader to be committee chairs. And then there's a whole process that follows that the leadership in the House and Senate choose who's going to serve on each committee. Now, obviously, the majority has more members that serve on the committee and then the minority, but the leadership they try to have geographic balance. They also want to try to have gender and diversity balance to the extent that they can. And they also try to be respectful of the minority members' choices about who wants to serve on the committee. The committee assignment process is not a political process. They try to have it be fair. So if a member is not chosen to be on a committee, it's not because of politics. It's just something, other things didn't work out. Next slide, please. Just rough, here's a very short timeline of kind of what to expect. So the budget forecast comes out twice a year. The official budget forecast will be out this Tuesday. So we call it the December forecast. It always comes out the first week in December. And then there's another budget forecast that comes out called the February forecast, which comes out in March. Those are the kind of two set points in time that the legislature and the governor use to determine what their budget process is going to be. We do get monthly projections every month, but those are just estimates. It's the December forecast and the February forecast that are kind of the official. And then once the budget forecasts come out, the governor has a timeline in which they need to submit their budget recommendations to the legislature. And then the legislature takes that budget and they have to set a budget, pass a budget and send it to the governor. And the governor has to sign a budget in place by the end of our fiscal year, which is June 30th. And if they don't, the state goes into state government shutdown. Our legislative sessions are always 2-year periods or bienniums. The first year of the biennium is always the odd numbered year, and that's the year they craft the 2-year state budget for the next 2 years. And if, as I mentioned, if they don't, we go into government shutdown. The second year of the biennium is always the even year, and that's typically for looking. You'll hear legislators say, "Well, it's not a budget setting year," and it's not, because we already have our 2-year state budget in place. So if they do have a budget bill, it's usually a smaller bill that we call it a supplemental budget. Our state budget is about $70 billion. A supplemental budget bill might be about, depending on what the forecast looks like, it could be 50 million, it could be 200 million, or it could be more depending on what the budget situation is for the state. They also typically pass a very large bonding bill in the second year of the biennium, and they tend to spend a little more time thinking about policy bills. But the first year of the biennium, well, let me start over. The Constitution or state law dictates when a legislative session begins and when it must adjourn. So state law says that in even numbered years, the year we set a budget, that the legislature begins the first week in January. In even numbered years, state law and the Constitution is silent on when they have to start. They don't even need to meet in the second year, but they always do. So for instance, last session, the odd numbered year, we began that first Tuesday in January. This year, the legislative session doesn't begin until February 12th, and the legislature just picked that number. They decided, the leadership met and decided that's when we're going to begin. The Constitution says, though, that each year, no matter the year, they have to adjourn no later than midnight on the third Monday after the third Sunday in May. And the Constitution dictates that, and they don't get to go around that. There's, you heard stories of them putting the cover on the clock in the chamber. They don't do that anymore. They have to adjourn. Also, the Constitution kind of dictates that we are this 2-year biennium. If the legislature were to go to a year-round legislature, they'd actually have to amend the Constitution to do so. And I don't think that would pass if they did ever advance it. Only the governor has the power to call a special session, and what a special session is, it just means they bring the legislature back any other time between the cycles that are already allowed under state law or the Constitution. Next slide. Okay. Dave, if you wouldn't mind, stop sharing your screen. I'm going to share mine so I can show you where to find information. So the Minnesota legislature has a really great website that folks can find information. And I think people can see the screen. Hopefully you see a page with a picture of Representative Heather Edelson. Thank you, Aaron. So there's a lot of information on this website, and One of my jobs is I help decipher a lot of that information. So there's some things that you know, some context that you might not be able to get about the legislative process, but I think the website is a really great resource for a number of things. One, you can find out who represents you. So you can find it at the bottom of this page, but you can also Google who represents me. And you just type in your address and it'll pull up who your state legislators are. And then you can click on those pages and it would, let's just say Heather Edelson was my representative. She's not, but for this purposes, it'll take you to this page and you can see a picture of what they look like, their contact information, what's their email address. You can also right here, subscribe. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. It says right here, email updates. Click to subscribe. You can subscribe to your legislators and they send you weekly email updates about what they're doing at the legislature. And many also send emails throughout the year too. It'll show you what committees they serve on. It will give you a little bit of background information, you know, where they live, what is their occupation, where they go to school, what's a little bit about their family. Here you can also find information about bills chief authored. So here, Heather was very busy last year. She introduced 37 bills. So here you can just, if you're meeting with her, you can scroll through there and see, is there anything here that would be of interest that she might bring up in a meeting? You can also get information on committees. So who's on the Education Finance Committee? So you can see, go to that committee page and see when they meet, who's the chair. You can click on this link that says membership and you can see who serves, who's appointed to serve on the committee. You can also subscribe to get notices for the committee, but if you do, you will get a lot of emails. And that's one of my jobs, is I decipher all the emails the committee send out about what's important to pay attention to. And if there is anything that is on the agenda that MASE cares about, I will certainly be communicating that information to Aaron and the tri-chairs of the legislative committee. But you can go and subscribe to that if you like. You can also see the, let me go back to that page. You can look at the schedule and see what is the legislature doing that day. And if there's a, let's say the Health, Finance, and Policy Committee was having an interim hearing today, which is not very common. But next session, you could go look at the schedule. And if the Education Finance Committee was meeting, they'll usually have a little live video link. And if you wanted to watch it, you could. You could, you know, especially like if we are able to send out in advance that MASE is testifying on a platform item bill, you could go in and watch it. You could also watch floor sessions and get directions to the Capitol. Now, if you participate in the MASE Lobby Day, all of that information will be provided to you. But if you come to the Capitol with your superintendent or board or you know, another organization you might be involved in, you can find parking information and where's the Capitol cafeteria, things like that. You can also look up bills. That page is most useful for, sorry, I didn't mean to close out. That page is most useful to, if you know, to get the language of the bill. I would say it's not always helpful because you may not have some context, but if you wanted to get a copy of the Education Finance Bill, you just, if you happen to know that. And when you get updates from me, I will have all the links to the bills in my updates, but if you want to search for a bill, you can do that. So there you can see who is the chief author. You can click on the most recent copy of the bill. This happens to be about 300 pages long. That's I think probably the most, those would be the most of the ways that would, I think you would use the website. I think the best way is probably to get some information about your legislators. Dave, if you wouldn't mind sharing the presentation again. Great. Next slide. Oh, okay. That's done. I guess we don't need the screen shared anymore, Dave. And then I just wanted to add, I mentioned this before, but MASE is going to be, MASE will now have access to an advocacy system called Ignite Advocacy. And if some of you are MASE members or MASA members, you might be familiar with it because MASA uses it. And it will be a tool that will make it much easier for you to communicate with legislators. And it's a tool that MASE will use when we need to either schedule legislative visits for lobby day, or if we have calls to action on specific pieces of legislation. You will get a communication from the MASE office that will ask you to contact your legislator. It'll explain a little bit about the issue. It will have a link that you click on, and it will take you to a page where you just type in your school district name, and a message will populate for you to send to all of the legislators from your school district area. Not just like, you won't just type in your own address and it would go to your own legislator. It would go to all of the legislators that represent, like, for instance, I live in District 196. The special ed director could send a message to all of the legislators in the District 196 area. And a message, you could either edit it, you could send it as is, or you could edit it to add more information about your school district or anything else that you might want to share. And then you hit send, and it sends a message directly from your email to the legislators. Now, this system is set up so that if you're from a traditional school district like District 196, it works. If you're from a cooperative school district like SCRED or one of the intermediates or one of the other ed districts, you'll be able to type in that cooperative school district name, and all of the legislators will pull up. So I'm hoping this will be a really useful tool for you to make it easier for you to communicate with your legislators. And as I said, if you're a MASA member, you might be familiar with it because we've used it for MASA. That is a lot of information, and I hope that I was able to give you some good background information to make you feel comfortable and kind of maybe doing some initial outreach. And my contact information is on the handout, and I'm always happy to have questions emailed to me, or if you can certainly give me a call too. And I'm available for questions. We have a few minutes left, and I appreciate all your time and attention today.
We really appreciate this, Valerie. I just have one really quick question, and I know it's a Friday and it's 1:30, but if you have a legislator that you know, maybe special education or education in general isn't their priority area, that and you continue to reach out and you kind of just get an auto reply almost response, do you continue to pursue that individual, or do you just think, well, that's just not going to be there? They're not interested in visiting about it.
You know, I would, I mean, obviously not obsessively. I wouldn't send emails over and over again, but I would also, sometimes if they don't respond to their email, I would try to maybe find a different day. If you've emailed them and they haven't responded, I would think, well, maybe I'll come to the MASE lobby day and I'll try to visit with them at the Capitol. And the reason why I say that is working with another organization I work with, there was a member who had that similar experience. That legislator never responded to anything. But when that community ed director came for their organization's day at the Capitol, that they reached out about scheduling a meeting with them at the Capitol. The legislator responded and said, absolutely, I'd love to meet with you. And the legislator explained with them that said, I want to make sure you're willing to come to me and have a conversation with me. And that, you know, I don't know why that legislator didn't just communicate that to them and just ignored it. That's weird to me, but I just think, you know, might be a reason. So I would continue to try. I also would continue to try because especially if that legislator is on a committee, on an education committee, and I'm sitting in the room and I know that Melissa has reached out to this particular legislator 8 times and they haven't responded, and that legislator talks about this particular issue and says, well, I haven't heard anyone, I will go talk to that legislator and say, that's not true, Representative Edelson. I know you've heard from the special ed director in your district. I've seen the emails they've sent you. And that's a role that I play, is to be that sometimes a bad cop and sometimes to hold them accountable. So I think it's important to keep trying. you know, maybe not do it 4 times a year, maybe do it once a year during session. Yeah.
Thank you. It's 1:30, so thank you so much for doing this, Valerie. I do think it's just really valuable information, and as we continue to grow our advocacy efforts for sure.
Thank you, everyone.